Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming, and I'm hoping this is going to be useful to you. We've called it an introduction to the primary non-statutory guidance. There's quite a lot of material out there to help with looking at the non-statutory guidance, so I'm going to take a particular view of it and give you the overview of that in just a moment. But just to say, there's a lot of you that I know and who know me, and you tend to be from in Devon, but we've not only got people from Devon here, there's people from around the country. So some of what I'm going to do is to try and connect thinking about this with work that has gone on both locally and nationally in the past few years since the national curriculum came out, so we can see this as sort of a bridge and not think that this is just something new that's been sort of introduced. So that's sort of included on this slide here. This is the overview of the session, what I'm intending exploring with you. So the context in which the guidance has been written, I think that's really important to have an understanding of where this has come from and what's behind it, because I think that gives you an understanding of the next thing, which is the intention. So it helps to provide clarity around intention. As I said, I want to consider how the guidance fits with the focus of maths development, both locally and nationally, since 2014. I want to think about key aspects that we're suggesting schools might want to consider as you begin to engage with the guidance and all the supplementary materials. Because what you want to do is use it to best inform school practice, and that includes professional development. With anything new, there's always that element of professional development for us to pay attention to, and so I think that's a really key thing. And quite a few of you here are leaders of some sort, whether you're head teachers, whether you're CEOs, whether you're subject leaders, you have a leadership role, and I think that's quite a key part of thinking about this. And I'm hoping that some of the things that we get you to think about in this session will also help you think about professional development. And at the end, I want to signpost other support that's there around the non-statutory guidance and related areas, but also get some ideas from you. Oh, sorry, I've got somebody saying they have got no sound. I'm going to continue and assume everybody else can hear me unless I get lots of messages. I want to get feedback from all of you about what other support would be useful, that you would find valuable. And we will also, I've also got something that, thanks Damien, I've also got we've got some ideas that I'd like to get your sort of feedback on. So that's the sort of shape of the session, and I hope that sort of sounds like it's going to be useful. So this is really, I really sort of want to encourage you to take a long view with this. And I think this is the same when there is any new development, any new document, is about seeing it as part of ongoing long-term development, not something that is something we've got to react to instantly and have sorted in a very short space of time. And I thought it was just useful to refer to this little extract from a blog by Charlie Strip, who's the director of NCETM, this month. He made this little sort of suggestion in his blog. Two things he'd suggest teachers and school leaders planning maths lessons at the start of the year. Avoid putting pupils under pressure to catch up. Calm consolidation of fundamental maths knowledge is what's needed. And I want to sort of mirror that and say, avoid putting teachers under pressure to suddenly be working with and have the non-statutory guidance at the heart of everything they're doing. Sort of a calm consideration of how this will best support your ongoing maths development is going to be the way ahead. So in the publication, in the guidance, it talks about the fact that it can support long-term, medium-term and short-term planning for teachers. But I also think, taking a leadership view of it, that it can support you thinking about maths development in your school in the short term, medium term and long term. And I think that's what I'm going to invite you to do, is to think about it in that way. What do we want to do in the short term to start engaging with this? How is this going to support us as we go into the medium term? And therefore, what do we need to put in place? What professional development do we need to do so that we are working with this over the medium term? And then what's our long-term view of how this fits into our maths development? So we're starting by thinking about, where has this document come from? What's the context it's been written in? And I've borrowed this slide, as you can see, from the Boolean Maths Hub, as Claire Christie in the Hub was one of the people involved in writing it. And she sort of explored where this has come from. And you'll see there's a number of documents feeding into the guidance. We had the national curriculum that became statutory in 2014. So obviously that's a key document here. But there are other key documents. We've got the report from the expert panel who did the national curriculum review. Down the bottom right, we've got some really key papers here. Lots of you who've worked with us will have heard of the Key Understandings papers that Nuffield published a number of years ago now. But that was a huge review of what research showed about the learning of mathematics in different areas and across the different ages. And so that was used to inform this, as was the curricula of high-performing jurisdictions, and in particular, this book about building the foundations of whole numbers. So there's, and that book will have some people in it that some of you will be familiar with. There's an article by Mike Askew in there, there's one by Alf Coles. And the top right, those are the professional development materials that NCTM have been writing over the last few years to fit with the work that's gone on around teaching for mastery. And one of the things that we had with the national curriculum was we had a national curriculum set down in year groups. And then we had this whole approach and set of principles around teaching for mastery that has very much coherence as one of its key ideas, and that being able to follow through year to year and be able to follow the thread of the mathematics learning, that's a key part of it. Our national curriculum does not have that transparent written in it. And so there was a little bit of a mismatch there between what we had in the national curriculum and the intention of the work around teaching for mastery. And that's really that was really the catalyst for the work on this. And the work on this began a year ago. It's not sort of suddenly happened. It's not something that's been written since we've known about COVID-19. It's something that was already being worked on. And the intention was to support schools and teachers to see how all of this work on teaching for mastery fitted with the national curriculum, and to provide more coherence and transparency of coherence around the national curriculum. So in the guidance, it has these two aims: bring greater coherence and clarity of progression, as I've just been saying. And then it's got this second aim: summarise core knowledge and understanding. So those of you in Devon will be aware that when the national curriculum first came out, as a maths team, we looked at it and went, there are so many elements to the programmes of study here. It's too much to think about when you're thinking about sort of assessing at the end of year whether children have got that key knowledge that before moving on, and that key understanding. And we wrote some key understandings for each year group to try and help teachers and particularly subject leaders with levels gone and trying to think about assessment. Are our children where we want them to be at the end of a year group, ready and in the right place for understanding and building the understanding in the following year group? We wrote those key understandings. And then when NCTM wrote assessment questions for teaching for mastery, they did quite a similar thing. They said, we're not looking at the whole curriculum, we're looking at core areas, key areas. And we looked at questions for that. And this has followed a similar model. They've looked at the curriculum and said, we really want to help teachers distinguish between elements of the programme of study that need to be taught, but they're really not high value and high importance. And then we've got this core knowledge and understanding that is absolutely crucial to that continuing progression. And so we're going to summarise that in this document and make that very transparent. So rather than having, lists of the elements in the programmes of study, and you've got no sense of, should I spend more time on this one? Should I spend more time on this one? What the non-statutory guidance is intended to give teachers is an understanding of the core elements that you will therefore spend more time on than the elements that haven't been included. The national curriculum is still the national curriculum. So in the guidance, it does not cover the whole of the curriculum, and the whole of the curriculum still needs to be taught. So it's really important that everybody understands that, but everybody understands the reason why it's not all in there, because it is this core knowledge and understanding. And that's intended to support teachers and to support schools when they're looking at the progression of their pupils to consider where they might spend more time. There has been a little bit of moving elements of the curriculum around to improve coherence. So if you remember about the national curriculum, we have a Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. That's the only level at which things are statutory by the end of Key Stage 1, by the end of Key Stage 2. Internally in those key stages, schools have always been able to move things around. So although the curriculum is laid down year by year, schools have been in charge of going, actually, no, we want to move this around. And what the team who worked on this non-statutory guidance did was they considered where it might help coherence to move some things around. And I'll come back to that later. There's only a couple of elements that have moved year group, but there's a substantial move of one part of the curriculum from being under one heading to being under another heading. And that's really, really useful. And we'll come to that. And then just to reiterate what I said, this was not written as a COVID-19 recovery document. So this isn't something that, oh, we're just going to use now as we're coping with the situation, as children are back in school now, and we're dealing with the some of the uncertainties around what the children have worked on since they've been in school and what they're understanding, how much time they've been doing maths, how much they've understood the maths they've been doing. This is a document that was written for the long term. However, it has its place in supporting recovery and supporting your current work. And that's why I was saying about thinking about it in both the short, not just both, in the short, the medium and the long term. So I'm going to explain the way it's set out, but that's not the main thrust of it, because there's an introductory PowerPoint where you can get all of that and share that. But we need to go through that to get to the sort of the meaty bits I want to sort of bring your attention to. So in the guidance, the main part of it is year group chapters. And each year group, there are things that are called ready to progress criteria. So this is the terminology we're all going to become familiar with. And the ready to progress criteria are basically what's the understanding children need to have when they get to the end of this year group around this area of mathematics. And that is, those criteria are linked to conceptual prerequisites and future applications. And I'll show you that in a moment. But they look at those and say, to be able to work on this area and get this understanding, what do I already need to understand? And where is this going to take me? Where are some of the places that this is going to be important and apply? And then there is teaching guidance. And the teaching guidance looks at the ready to progress criteria, and it has some very fundamental things that it includes: core representations, language structures, and connections to other criteria. And we'll just unpick those a little bit in a moment. It also has example assessment questions that are linked to the ready to progress criteria. And there's a guidance on the development of calculation and fluency. In addition to the guidance to that document, there are other materials. There's a video for each year group that gives an overview of the mathematics in that year group, and those, they're sort of like between around 13 and 20 minutes long, and they're YouTube videos. And so one of the things you might be thinking, if you're a subject leader or a head teacher, is maybe we dedicate a little bit of staff time to everybody watching their year group video. And then we come back and have a discussion, and we see what the things are we've noticed, and start to get into the document that way. NCTM have been doing an awful lot of work over the summer holidays, and they've produced a PowerPoint exemplification for each of the criterion. And they link in other resources, including the professional development materials they produced previously. And there are activities with animated slides. They're intended for use with small groups and one-to-one. And those include Enrich. Enrich have worked with NCTM and identified where they have activities that would support the different elements in the guidance, and those have been included. It's a really important thing to understand about those PowerPoints. We will come back to them later, but they are not intended to be lessons. They are not lessons. They have resources that might supplement lessons, or they might give you starting points. They are absolutely intended to be used. The slides that are for use with pupils are intended for small groups and one-to-one, but we'll come to that later. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 key messages with you, and these are the sorts of things that we really want to draw your attention to, that you're not going to necessarily get when you're looking at the materials themselves, but they're really important and they come from the materials but could be missed. So the first one is the aims of the national curriculum have not changed. They are still the same. So those three aims you'll all be very familiar with. We've had them since 2014. They are absolutely fundamental to the teaching of mathematics in primary. And if you engage with the PowerPoint that is the video, the PowerPoint of the video, that's the introduction to the DFE primary national curriculum. It's the PowerPoint. On slide 5, the national curriculum aims are brought up, and this quote is there. We need all pupils to be fluent, flexible, and have deep conceptual knowledge. That's a kind of a summary of those aims. So that's what the guidance is seeking to do. It's seeking to support teachers, to support pupils, to be fluent, flexible, and have deep conceptual knowledge so that the aims of the national curriculum are being met. So one of the things I think is really important when this is being shared with all staff is to really make sure you hold on to those aims. The aims of the national curriculum are critical, they are important, and they are really beneficial, and we need to not lose sight of those. And that's sometimes what happens when something new comes in. We lose sight of some of the key things that are already there. The second key message, it's in the guidance document, it's not quite so obvious. In some of the PowerPoints, it makes it absolutely obvious. But they have worked on calculation by focusing on 2 relationships, not 4 separate operations. So they look at additive relationships, so that's addition and subtraction together, and they look at multiplicative relationships, multiplication, division together. So again, those of you that have worked with us in the past and over the past few years, as we've worked with supporting work around the national curriculum, will recognise that. We've talked about additive and multiplicative understanding and additive and multiplicative reasoning for quite a few years now, and the work we did developing the primary mathematics planning framework focuses on additive reasoning and multiplicative reasoning. We don't have 4 operations in there. That's the same thing in no-nonsense number facts, and any of you that have had teachers involved in our developing reasoning, we look at additive reasoning and multiplicative reasoning. So quite a few of you this won't be new to. But what's interesting is that is now part of the national dialogue, and it very much comes from and builds on work that Anne Watson has done and looking at this. So what do we mean, additive relationships and multiplicative relationships? So let's just have a look. Just have a little think about for yourself the relationship between these 2 numbers. And think about the fact that you could express that relationship additively, or you could express that relationship multiplicatively. And we've actually got a nice little representation of that here. There's a representation of the additive relationship, and that representation brings together both addition and subtraction because it's a relationship, and in a relationship we can look at it from both points of view. So if I'm 20 and I look at 60, I'm thinking I've got to add 40. If I'm 60 and I look at 20, I've got to subtract 40. So the relationship is about looking at things in both directions, and that's why you get both addition and subtraction together, because they are about looking at that in both directions. And then alongside that, we could think about the multiplicative relationship between those 2 numbers. So in a similar way, we could look at 20 and think, oh, I've got to multiply by 3 to get to 60. Or we can start from 60 and say, oh, we've got to divide by 3 to get to 20. So what we've got in all the year groups looking at calculation is we've got a focus on additive relationships, a focus on multiplicative relationships where those are relevant to the document. There are a couple of year groups where there are no ready to progress criteria for additive, and I'll come to that later. So my next key message is that pupils should be making decisions and thinking flexibly. And again, that is nothing new. Many of you will have heard us said that many times and will have been working on this. And I think it's really important to know that that is the expectation as written into the document. I've put an example there from year 3. And I put in bold, pupils should select the most efficient method to calculate depending on the numbers involved. That's been something we've talked about forever. That's what no-nonsense number facts is about, and is to support. It's absolutely to support that decision making, that flexibility. You need to know things, but you need to know and understand how to use them and how they relate to each other. So you need all of that. This is the fourth key message, and representation is a key part of this document. The team working on it spent a lot of time thinking about and deliberating about the representations to include and how they are best used at different points in the document, in the guidance. But this message runs through. The representations are used to support understanding rather than doing. And I've put an example there for you, if you to have a look at. But again, this is a key message that we've been talking about for a long time, but I think it's one. And as leaders and subject leaders, you might want to think about this. When you see representations being used in your school, are they being used to support understanding, or are the children using the representation to get an answer? Those are two different things. Support for understanding means actually the representation is going to disappear over time because you won't need it, because you now understand, and that allows you to do things and also to make connections. Using representations to get to answers tends to create a dependency and doesn't develop that mathematical thinking. And I think this is something that there's still quite a lot of work for all of us to do on, is as a profession to really engage with and understand that notion. And then the fifth key message is one about assessment. I mentioned that there are assessment questions included in the document, but they're very clear in the document that assessment is about more than right answer. So again, I've put a little excerpt from the document there. It's about more than knowing. It's trying to get this understanding in as well. So that means the assessment questions and how you use them, that's going to determine whether you get more than just the right answers. And the use of the assessment questions with groups and with individuals, where you can probe understanding and ask them to explain their thinking and ask them to show you and to demonstrate and all of those things, that's where you're going to get that real quality assessment that's going to inform teaching. And all of those 5 key messages, I hope people can see how they fit with something we've gone back to time and time again in work we've done, which is this notion of the difference between relational understanding and instrumental understanding that comes from SCEMP back in the 70s. So any of you where your schools have been involved in a developing teaching for mastery group, we've sent you this paper to read before the group has started. That's been one of our key documents that we've used. Anybody that's been involved in the developing reasoning programs we run, this has been what we've asked you to read before we start. So we've used this document quite a lot to inform thinking and discussion really around mathematics. And so the non-statutory guidance fits with all the work that's been going on around teaching for mastery, in that the intention is that we are building relational understanding. So that is understanding not just what to do or how to do something, but why. How does the mathematics work? Why does it work? So that's really key. And I think it's nice to sort of hold on to that. And again, that might be something that's worth staff reading as you're starting to talk about and think about the non-statutory guidance and how this is going to inform your maths development in your schools. So let's just sort of delve now into what's the content of the guidance a little bit more, and start with these ready to progress criteria, which, as I said, it's already becoming a phrase I'm getting used to, and I think we'll all get used to it quite quickly. These, again, just to remind you, they're the most important conceptual knowledge and understanding that pupils need for this progress, this progression, as the team identified, and they used all the sort of documents that I referred to right at the beginning to inform that thinking. So at the beginning of the guidance, you've got the ready to progress criteria set out, showing that progression from year 1 to year 6. I just want to use this one from the number place value, just to draw your attention to something, that there is a sort of a set way that the lettering and numbering works. So you've got different strands. So this is NPV, number place value. The first time there is a criterion for this in any year group is called NPV1, and then the next one is called NPV2. So what this means in Key Stage 2 is actually that NPV1 is that top line following through, and NPV2 is that second line, and then NPV3. But in Key Stage 1, there isn't something in both year 1 and year 2 for all of the the elements. So in year 1, there is MPV1 is the same as year 3, 4, 5, and 6, but there's nothing in that line for year 2. So for year 2, MPV1 is on the next line. So what you have to just be a little bit careful when people are looking at the document, that when you look across a row, the labelling may not all be the same, okay? So if you look across that middle row, it's 2 MPV1, 3 MPV2, 4 MPV2, 5 MPV2, 6 MPV2. So it's just getting your head around that. You might have assumed that each row, because the arrows are indicating, then this goes to here, to here, to here. That's the progression there from one to the next to the next. But the labelling isn't necessarily the same number. So it's just to be aware of that. So they've organised, as I said, they've organised strands, and that was number and place value we were just looking at there. So they've organised it around 6 strands. And so you've got your own codes, the codes for each of them there. And when you look down the strands, it might suddenly jump out at you and go, there's no measurement there, there's no statistics there. What they've done is they've integrated those within number. Measurement and statistics are basically contexts for examining number. Yes, there are things you have to understand about both measurement and statistics that are particular to them, but the vast majority of what you do really sits under number, and a lot of it is actually under understanding the number system. So they've woven those in, and a lot of the context comes from that. And again, I've just drawn attention for those of you that have been working with us and work with our materials. That's exactly the approach we took in the primary mathematics planning framework. We didn't have measurement and statistics. We used them as context within number and within the calculation. So that's exactly what we've done. And also for those of you that have been involved with the developing reasoning, we do 6 days. They are very similar to this. They're very similar to those. So there's a lot of ways you can match up what you have been doing with this. So just a slide to illustrate some of the ways that scales, measures, statistics are integrated into number there. Okay, at the start of each of the year group chapters, they have the ready to progress criteria. And as I said to you, so that center column is the ready to progress criteria. You have the prerequisites, the conceptual prerequisites in the first column, and you have future applications in the last column. And this might be one of the places where you're thinking about in the current situation, as teachers are faced with more uncertainty about knowing where children are starting from and their understanding, is you might need to explore some of those prerequisites and spend some time on those before being able to engage in the ready to progress criteria and work on those areas. And that may be where some of the assessment questions from the previous year that are matched to those conceptual prerequisites might be useful, as well as for the ones in your year group. So we're going to sort of delve into the teaching guidance. And what I wanted to do was make another big connection here. So here's a model that hopefully most people, if not all of you, are familiar with. We refer to it as the Connective model. We've worked with it for many years now, and we've adapted it from a model that comes from the work of Derek Haylock and Ann Coburn that they were working on sort of many years ago. And I just want to sort of indicate how the teaching guidance in the non-statutory guidance fits with and can be seen to reflect, and then you might help your teachers to understand how it reflects the Connective model and work they've probably already thought about around this. So we'll start with that if I go over there, it's the wrong side of the diagram for you anyway. The one that's on that side, I think, on the right hand side, the mathematical image or picture. So this is a statement from the guidance. They have selected a core set of representations. And what are those representations being used for? They are being used to expose important mathematical structures and ideas and make them accessible to pupils. That's the intention. Remember, it's not about using them to get an answer. It's about using them so that children can see and understand the structures, and therefore they understand the mathematics, but they then don't need that to go away and do some mathematics. So I'm going to get you to do something now. So you need a piece of paper. And could you draw yourself 2 10 frames, just like the ones on the screen? I am going to wait a moment while you do that. So 10 frames they're one of the core representations. And so what we want to imagine is we're using the image of the tens frames to support understanding of how you can connect a known fact with deriving a fact. And so the known fact we're going to represent is 3 add 3 equals 6. So I want you on one of the frames to represent 3 add 3 equals 6 in a way that you think will help make a connection between 3 add 3 equals 6. I know that. Therefore, I can work out 4 add 3. I can derive it. So on one of your frames, I want you to draw circles or whatever you like to show that representation of 3 plus 3 equaling 6. But you then going to connect to your second frame where you're going to draw 4 add 3. And just think about the dialogue that might go alongside this, the narration. That might be the teacher, it might be the pupil, it could be a combination. But how is this connection being made? I'll just give you a moment to do that. Okay. So this connection between 3 add 3 equals 6 and 4 add 3 equals 7 is in the guidance. And they use the tens frames. And here's the extract. It's on page 25. It's in year 1. And this is the representation they chose. So one of you may have done this or you may have done something different, but it's really key to understand each time with the representations and to interrogate understanding of why have they chosen to do it like that. And this again could be a really good place to focus some professional development, to take one of the core representations, to look at it across the year groups and to interrogate how they use that core representation and why they use it like that. What's the intention? So here we've got the 3 and the 3 set out side by side very deliberately. And that fits with representations of 6 that children might well be familiar with. So not only are you seeing that 3 add 3 next to each other to help you see the change to 4 add 3, the 3 add 3 being 6 is fitting with representations of 6 you are likely to be familiar with. So they're iconic representations, like on dice, like the Numicon frame. They're things that we hope children will recognise as 6. So there's more than one layer to this. One of the ideas there is that the 3 and the 3 is 6, and I'm arranging it so you can see that 6 easily, but you can also see that connection with the 4 add 3, because what I'm doing is just adding that one counter on top of the 6, and I can see that very, very easily, and I can see the 4 and the 3 within that 6 very easily, and I can see the 3, sorry, within the 7, and I can see the 3 and the 3 within the 6 very easily. If you complete one of the rows of the tens frame or one of the columns, the way it's laid out here, so you've got a complete 5 and a 1, it is much harder when you're putting an extra 1 down to keep hold of the 4 as a 4, because it will be split into 2 and 2, and you hopefully know that, but you're not sort of seeing that 4-ness together. Whereas in this representation, the 3 and the 3 are easy to see, the 4 and the 3 are easy to see, and that connection between the two. And we're also building on knowledge of iconic representations. So the use of the representation is really important in the document, and to really interrogate that. So if you could have a little look here, you've got some representations on the right hand side, 3 different representations, and hopefully you can see well enough this chart from the guidance. It's the one we were looking at earlier. And if you're sat with somebody else, you can have a little chat about it, or if you're on your own, have a little chat to yourself. Where would those representations be useful? For which of the ready to progress criteria might you use the representations on the right hand side? Just give you a little moment. So 2MPV1 is sort of quite an obvious place for that, which is recognise the place value of each digit in 2-digit numbers and compose and decompose 2-digit numbers using standard and non-standard partitioning. But again, from a professional development idea, this might be a nice thing to do, to take some of the images from different parts of the document and have the chart and go, so where would you use this? Why? Where would you use this? Because most of the representations run through the document, but the way they're being used will obviously be different for different year groups, and the numbers and things they're being used with will be different. So because you've got tens and ones on the right hand side here, you're looking for 2-digit numbers within the document. So let's just have a little think about these 3 representations. Have a little think. What do you notice is the same about them? If we were all together in a room, I would take some feedback. So I know that what you'll have noticed is that they are all representations of 2-digit numbers as groups of 10 and additional ones. There is a very key bit of understanding around unitizing that sits within the non-statutory guidance. And again, I think this is an area that might be quite rich for professional development, to really explore where unitizing occurs throughout the curriculum and the importance of unitizing and how to support it. But unitizing is about being able to understand one group of 10 rather than 10 ones, for example, and we have lots of unitizing that happens. So it's key to understanding the number system and place value. It's actually key within things like multiplication as well. So if that's what's the same, then what's different about those representations? What do you notice? They have the team working on this have purposefully used these 3 representations around the same bit of mathematics because they want children to be able to deal with all of them. So why have they done that? What's the purpose in that? Again, have a little look at them and a little think. So what I'm hoping you notice is that top left-hand one has got 10s on the left, 1s on the right. It matches the way that we would write the number. Okay, the order of the digits will be the order of the representation. I think those are supposed to be straws bundled up. Underneath, you've got your base 10 or your deans. And what you'll notice there is that the 1s are now on the left and the 10s are on the right. Now, I need you still to be able to see that you have 48 there and not call it 84. I need you to understand that it's not about the way things are displayed on the bit of paper, but it's about the value of the elements. And so to be able to connect 48 to that image is really important. The one on the right, 2 different things about it really. First of all, it's a real life context, if you like. It's pencils, it's things that you have around. But secondly, they're not organised in a nice, neat way like the other 2 are. The packets of 10 and the single pencils are all scattered around. But I still need you to be able to look at that and go, oh, that's 36. I can see the 30, I can see the 6. And also, you might want to organise it yourself, but I need you to be able to connect all of those with representations of 2-digit numbers. So there are deliberate decisions that the team has made who have written this about the representations, and sometimes it's about providing children with different views of the same mathematics in order to ensure you've got that full conceptual understanding. And this is their statement from NCTM. Representations are used to support all children to see the maths, not do the maths. And these are the core representations that are used throughout. And I'll just sort of name them. But again, some of these might be very familiar and some might be ones where you're thinking, I don't think as a staff we've ever really engaged with that. Or I know one teacher uses it, but we might need to work on that. So top right, that's called the Coherence chart. So anybody, again, who's been on our developing reasoning and other things that we run will be familiar with it. But there may be many teachers that have not used it or know about it, but are not sure how to use it best. And with all these representations, there's a place for using them alongside each other. So that's a Coherence chart. Underneath, you've got number lines, so they run throughout. In the middle, you've got the tens frame, like we were just looking at. In the picture you've got there, it's got decimal place value counters on it. So it's used in year 1, thinking about making 10, or like we just a moment ago, looking at 3 and 3 and 4 and 3, but it's completely relevant when we're looking at things like decimals. The 2 in the top left are 2 different versions of partitioning models. So you've got bar model is one of them. You've got what sometimes gets called part whole or the cherry diagram. Those are two different partitioning. And then we've also got this kind of like unitizing groups of things being one. So that's the bottom one there. And you can see that's a bit more contextual as well. So as well as those representations, different representations to represent the same thing, we have representations being used across the year groups to help make connections. So I've just taken one example here. Here's something from year 2 where the tens frame is being used to help children understand 7 add 5 by using their knowledge of 7 add 3 equaling 10. So that partitioning of 5 into 3 and 2. I know 7 and 3 is 10, and there's 2 more, so it's 12. So that's what we've got on page 57 for year 2 around that. But let's have a look in year 3. Here, we're looking at 80 plus 60, and we're using place value counters that have a value of 10. But the image is almost the same. It's doing exactly the same thing. It's using that knowledge of 80 plus 20 equaling 100, because I know 8 add 2 equals 10, to think about 80 add 60 as 80 add 20 plus the 40. So it's 140. Jumping to year 5, here it is with the decimals. We've got decimal place value counters being used now. And now we've got 0.8 plus 0.6. So you can see how the same image has been being used to help make connections in understanding across the year groups and help children to see that when they are thinking about adding decimals, they are using their understanding of adding whole numbers. And when they're thinking about adding 2-digit numbers, they're using their understanding of adding single-digit numbers. And then we're building and we're making those connections. And there's clearly a narrative that needs to go alongside that to make sense of it. But that's sort of one of the key sort of things, is to have that representations being used across the year groups to help make the connections, expose the structure, expose the connection of one structure with another structure, and help to make those connections. And of course, these are illustrated in the guidance, but you can be using actual place value counters and tens frames to do this. There's a decision between when you're actually using equipment and when you're using images. They're having to represent it for you in pictures because it's a document rather than anything else. So I just mentioned language and narrative. So thinking about a connective model, we've looked at the mathematical image and picture. Now we're thinking about the language aspect here. And that we have these boxes throughout the guidance that have a language focus. There's a direct indication of things teachers should be attending to or could be attending to support understanding through thinking about the language. And the point of the language is also about exposing structure and making connection between mathematics and representation. So here we've got a representation of 9 packs of 10. So it's a representation of 90. We could count those to see how many there are by saying our counting numbers, 10, 20, 30. But we could also count them by attending to the fact that they are groups of 10. So 1 group of 10, 2 groups of 10, 3 groups of 10. And then what we can do is we can shorten that to saying, well, that's 1 10, 2 10s, 3 10s, 4 10s. And what we're doing there is we're exposing the structure of our T numbers that sometimes gets hidden because they're not transparent enough. So 30, quite hard to hear 3 10s in there. But if we're linking, saying 10, 20, 30 with 1 10, 2 10s, 3 10s, we're exposing the structure of the number and the understanding of those T numbers. And we are also linking with multiplication. So the idea that 30 is 3 10s, that's a multiplication fact right in there. So the language helps to expose structure. It helps to make sense of representations. Language is really another representation itself of the mathematics, but it helps to also connect mathematical representations with the mathematics. So it's multifaceted and supported throughout. That's not as clear as I'd like it to be, but this is one of the images we had earlier. And underneath it says 8 plus 6 is equal to 14. So 8 tenths plus 6 tenths is equal to 14 tenths. This is what I mean about is exposing those connections and that structure. 14 tenths is equal to 1 and 4 tenths. So the language we're using is externalizing our recognition of the structure, and that helps us to make sense of it and to make connections between different representations and between mathematics in different places. And so there will be times when the teacher is modeling the language, there'll be times when the children are using the language, but there are suggestions there of how that language might be used to help expose that structure and make those connections. And sometimes there are opportunities for that narrative I was talking about, and I think we need to put lots of opportunities in for the narrative. So here's an assessment question as it happens, taken from year one. And the question, what you're asking the children to do here is to explain why Holly is written 4 subtract 1 equals 3 to go with these pictures. So it's the story, it's the narrative. What is happening here? And how does that match with the symbols? So that language is a real connection. And we've often talked in the connective model about language being in 2 places. We've got the language section, and often that's about very specific mathematics and how mathematical language fits into what the grammar is, how it fits into sentences. It's not just vocabulary, it's how it fits into sentences. But you've also got the talk, and that sits embedded in those arrows, and this is part of that. So at the bottom of the connective model, we have context. So we've already said that maths and statistics are common contexts used throughout the non-statutory guidance. There aren't so many everyday contexts appearing beyond Key Stage 1, but there are in Key Stage 1. But I think one of the things about that is we still need context in mathematics, but what you'll be looking for in Key Stage 2 is where the context fits with what's relevant for your class, what you're working on at the moment, what fits with the children's experience and understanding, and contextualizing the mathematics in the way that it's contextualized in Key Stage 1. And there's a couple of examples from Key Stage 1 there. And then finally, symbols. And I've just taken this extract from year 1. I'll just give you a moment to read that. So there's a real expectation here that symbols are being used to express understanding. You're not going, oh, let's just learn the names of these symbols and be able to say sentences about them. They are expressing mathematics and mathematical understanding that comes from situations and mathematical stories. So go back to those teacups on the slide here. Those numbers, Holly wrote those numbers in response to the picture and the story she had for that picture. Now, it doesn't mean you can't start from symbols, but especially when we're first introducing them, they need to be introduced as ways of capturing the meaning of the story, of the situation. And so very much this is year 1, from the word go. It's important pupils do not think of the equal symbols as meaning and the answer is, because we're building up a real understanding of equations and expressions, and that they capture the mathematics from situations, and they have meaning embedded in them. Okay, so that's sort of looking at how the connective model, and I think there's lots there that people could do if they've used the connective model to help to look at take that as the lens to look at the guidance and explore that through professional development. Those of you that have been looking at concrete pictorial abstract, that fits as well because the connective model has all those elements in it. And so that's one lens to look at it. Another lens I'm just going to put on it now is the one of coherence. And if you remember, that's one of the main aims of the guidance. And I just really want to think about that sort of sense of coherence and how they're trying to achieve that, and where you might find that really explicitly in the document. And number and place value is a really good example of this. In fact, number and place value has been given more attention, and the elements of it have been made more explicit in this guidance than I think that there is sitting in the national curriculum. And in Key Stage 2, if you remember when we looked at the chart earlier, MPV 1, 2, 3 and 4 follow right through, and then in Key Stage 1 they appear, some in year 1, some in year 2. So they have got names, and here are sort of illustrations of them. And they are four distinct aspects of understanding number, the number system, place value. We've got the relationship between adjacent place value units, understanding the relationship between 1 and 10, multiplying by 10. We multiply by 10. In our number system, we're multiplying by 10 as we move across the columns in one direction. We're dividing by 10 when we move across the columns in another direction. So that relationship between adjacent place value units, absolutely key to understanding our number system, absolutely key to understanding decimals. And this is the element that they have moved, and I'll have a slide on it in a moment, that makes much more sense than what we had as it's laid out in the national curriculum. Decimal numbers have been included as part of number and place value because decimal numbers are an extension of the understanding of our number system that you develop through looking at whole numbers. In the national curriculum, all the work around decimal numbers sits under the heading of fractions. Now, of course, they connect with fractions, and of course, we need to connect them with fractions. But the way they start and our understanding of them and how we first develop that is as an extension of the number system. And that isn't always what children are getting as their understanding around that. So that's really important. MPV2, standard and non-standard partitioning. And there you've got a couple of models. You've got the use of the cherry diagram, and you've got place value counters. And so there you've got standard, that's along your place value columns, 5,340 and 2, and non-standard, knowing that 4,000, 1,342. We could partition 5,342 like that. Over the past, I'm wondering whether you lost me for a moment. So I'm just going to start that bit again. Oh, a few people are typing now. Yeah, you lost me. Okay, that's fine. I'm back. Are you back? Am I back? Are we all back? Yeah, we're back. Lovely. So MPV3, we'll start there. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate that. I had a sudden whirring and I thought, ooh, right. So MPV3, as a maths team, we're really pleased to see this here. So some of you will know that over the last 2 years, we've had a research project running about understanding number lines as a way of understanding the number system, because we were very aware that children across the primary age range did not have a good understanding of number lines and the structure of number lines and how they were a representation of the number system. They did things on number lines, but they didn't understand it as a structure of the number system. And this was borne out by some work that was done within IMAPS by Jeremy Hodgin and others, where they were looking in Key Stage 3, where they said children that are struggling with maths in Key Stage 3 don't understand number lines. So we've done this research project on this, and we're really pleased to see this pulled out as a distinct element about understanding the place of numbers in the linear number system. So that might be something that teachers have not attended to as much before. Certainly the teachers we've worked with on our project have said to us, oh, we haven't really been attending to this because it's not really transparently there. It's not as explicit in the national curriculum, but we really see the value of it. So that being pulled out, I think that's going to be really useful. And then we have MPV4, which is the common partitions of place value units. The fact that we often partition things into 2, 4, 5, and 10 parts. So for example, 250s for 1,000. We partition 1,000 into 4 lots of 250 and knowing that. So that's where that is. And we've looked at this. This shows that progression across. So we've got in Key Stage 2, MPV 1, 2, 3, 4 follow through, and then in year 1, MPV 1 follows into MPV 1 for the other year groups, but MPV 2 matches to MPV 3 for Key Stage 2. So it's just being aware of that little tweaking. And there it is, as I said, decimals. So there's those four elements again, but looking at the decimal numbers being included. And I'm hoping you can see it absolutely makes sense for decimal numbers to be part of in the guidance, the part of the number and place value, and to really sort of get that embedded understanding of decimals as an extension of our number system. A second element of coherence I just wanted to bring to your attention, and I particularly did this because I didn't want just to be numbers and things I was talking about, is around geometry, where they've looked at it and taken this sort of view of thinking about vertices, sides and space as three different elements, and those run across the across the year groups, starting with informally describing all the way through to reasoning with measurements. You've got that at the bottom there. And that is almost identical to some work we do on our geometric reasoning day, on our developing reasoning course. And the reason for that is that our geometric reasoning course is based on the Japanese curriculum, and this idea is based on the curriculum from high performing jurisdictions, places like Japan. So this is obviously something that's quite common about those jurisdictions. And so I think, again, that might be a different way of looking at geometric reasoning than maybe people have done. And there is a much greater emphasis on drawing within, when you look at this strand and you look across the year groups. I think some teachers might be surprised at some of the elements of drawing, apart from the teachers that have been on our developing reasoning, because we do a lot of drawing on that. So here are some changes for you to note. I've talked already about the decimal numbers are included in number and place value rather than as part of fractions, which is a fantastic move, makes complete sense. But, you know, there's a bit of adjustment of thinking there for people. This is one I think you're going to find interesting and you're going to need to really attend to. And if you're a subject leader, this one's going to need quite a bit of attention, I think. There are no addition, subtraction, so no additive understanding, ready to progress criteria in year 4 and year 5. When you look at your table, it's a big blank for year 4 and year 5. That's because there's no new core knowledge and understanding in those year groups. And if you remember, what the document is looking at is that core knowledge for each year group that you're building on. Well, if you think about what is in the national curriculum for addition and subtraction, you really have secured that core understanding by the end of year 4, and then you're just using and applying it. Now, there are statements in the national curriculum, and you still need to use and apply it in year 4 and year 5, but there's no ready to progress criteria. So you're going to have to really work with your year 4 and year 5 teachers to ensure that there is still plenty of opportunity for children to use and apply their addition and subtraction in other elements of what they're doing, because there's no ready to progress criteria. And if you start using the non-statutory guidance, there's a danger there. So I just wanted to flag that one up. And only 2 elements have actually moved year group: converting between mixed numbers and improper fractions, and counting in steps of 25. And they've moved them for coherence reasons. But I think one of the things to also remember is, again, this is non-statutory and it's guidance. So if as a school you're looking at something and you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure about that, then if you think that it doesn't make it as coherent, you can move it back. That's for you to do. But you need to understand, first of all, why it's been moved and what that coherence is that's intended. And the document should really explain that. Okay, so I've mentioned already one of the key messages was about assessment is more than getting the answer right. And I also wanted to just pull out here that a key thing for teachers is to understand why questions have been chosen, what the intention again is behind them. You might need to spend some time looking at questions together and going, what are they getting at with this? Why have they had these 2 questions? What's the intention? What am I looking for when I'm sat with children, listening to them, explaining or asking them questions about their thinking? What am I attending to, and what am I looking for? So I've taken this from year 1. These are 2 assessment questions for 1 criterion in year 1. And it's around composition of numbers. So if we have a look at the first question, the ducklings, there you're being given a number and you're being asked to partition it. You're being asked to think about how might you partition 6 so that it's 2 ponds have some ducks on, or some ducklings. If you look at the second question, it's still about partitioning a number, But here, you know, one of the groups, one of the partitions, one of the groups it's been partitioned into, you know the number of counters altogether. What's the other part? So in one of them, you are partitioning, and the other one, a number has been partitioned, and you're identifying one of the parts. So that's very deliberate, very deliberate. So you may want to spend some time exploring and examining what different assessment questions are actually getting at. What's the point of them? What's behind them? What's the intention? Thank you. I know I got a whirring again, but I should be back again now. Is that right? Well, happy days. Let's get to 5 o'clock, shall we? um, so I've gone through those, and hopefully there's been some useful things for you to think about, whether you're a teacher, a class teacher, whether you're a class teacher and a subject leader, whether you're a head teacher and a subject leader, head teacher, class teacher, subject leader, whether you're a CEO, all of those. There's some things for you to think about. And particularly what I wanted to draw your attention to is where you might want to focus some of your thinking about that professional development in the short term, medium term, and long term. What do you need teachers to know about immediately? What do you want them to understand as we move through with using the document? And what's our intention and our aim, and how do we get to that building professional development over time? I just want to draw your attention to some of the things around the PowerPoints that are there. And there's 79, because there are 79 ready to progress criteria. So there are 79 PowerPoints. And we're just going to look at some slides from one of them so that I can draw attention to a few things for you. So this comes from year 3. It's year 3 MPV2, place value in 3-digit numbers. So one of the things in all of them is it explains what that PowerPoint's about. It gives you connections to the video that summarizes for the year group that I've already mentioned, and it also connects you to the non-statutory guidance that we've just been looking at for that section. It also directs you to where there might be some materials in the professional development materials that are relevant to this. So it's trying to connect up different things that have been created. Oh, I haven't got a word this time. Can other people hear me? Oh, right. I think Stephanie's lost me then, but other people are fine, so I'll carry on. So it's trying to connect up the different materials that are already out there, particularly those produced by NCTM. On the PowerPoint slides, there are 3 slides that appear on every single one, and they are absolutely vital and likely to be skipped over by people if you don't draw their attention to them. So I'm just going to sort of like draw your attention to them. The following slides can be used in the context of pre-teaching, intervention, or supplementary material integrated. They do not represent complete lessons and should not be used as such. So that's really important. They're not intended to be full lessons. I also just want to flag up to you that pre-teaching is identified as one of the ways they might be used. And again, lots of you will have worked on pre-teaching and assigning competence with us. And it's just really nice to see that as one of the ways that it's being offered, that we might be working with children. That might be one of the ways you're working with children as part of your COVID recovery, that you put more pre-teaching in place. But also that might be an ongoing thing that you're working on as you work with individual children and groups of children. Really important bit at the bottom there, that even if you're working with small groups using these materials, those pupils should still have access to the main teaching. It shouldn't replace main teaching. This is about and I'm back, everybody. I know now when I'm gone and when I'm back. This is getting, I'm really apologise. Obviously, internet is under pressure, isn't it? Or something's going on. Hopefully that won't happen too many more times before we finish. So what I was saying was really important to note that this shouldn't, small group work shouldn't be replacing the access to the class lesson. So there's some guidance in these slides for using the slides with working with the small group, whether it's pre-teaching or intervention. I like that first one. Take time to build understanding of the key idea. Don't use more than 4 slides in any one session, probably fewer. You're not trying to race through the PowerPoint. So I think it's really important, again, if any of those slides are going to be used, that you spend some time interrogating these key messages that are on the slides. And the slides are animated, so when you're using it, here's one example of an animation. So I've had to do it in a particular way on here. So you say the numbers and the numbers appear. It's much smoother on the PowerPoint. On mine, it's probably very juttery. And then the same idea here now with the Connective chart. We're looking at the same number and we're seeing 340 and 2, making 342, and we're matching that to an addition. And just to point out to you, I mentioned that there are links to Enrich activities. So at the end of this PowerPoint, there are more slides in this PowerPoint. Here's a follow-up Enrich activity, really lovely one about a coded 100 square where all the numbers are in code, but you use your understanding of the structure of 2-digit numbers to piece it together. So that's a lovely link. Right, I'm going to get to the bit where you can all put things in chat, and if I freeze, it won't matter so much. So this is my intention, and I'm hoping that you've got a sense of all of these from what we've done so far. And I'm just really at the bottom one, the signposting further support and gather ideas. So NCTM, there's a PowerPoint that's there on the website, introduces the guidance that you might want to use with staff, and it looks a bit more at the sort of real nuts and boltsy going through the pages, which I chose not to do because that was there. There are resources for year 7 to see how they can build on and make sense of and make use of. So you may want to look at those. And as I've said, the videos on YouTube for each year group. And then this is further support from us that's available and out there and that we'll be offering over this term and the coming terms. But I also want to get your feedback, as I said, about things that might be useful. So we do have our maths subject leader meetings. Many of you on here know about those, attend them, or have people from your school who attend them. We will take as our thread. So it'll be one of the elements we look at each time through the year, work around the non-statutory guidance. One of the things we're going to start with is thinking about the fact that there may be things in there that puzzle you, that you're surprised at, that you don't understand. There are things in that document that puzzle me, that have surprised me. It would be nice to pull those out and have some conversations about those, and then think about, oh, is this something for me to really make more sense of? Or actually, am I thinking, yeah, that doesn't quite fit there for me, so that bit I'm not going to attend to. So there will be things that you go, oh, I'm not sure about that, or I'm puzzled by that, or do I fully understand it? And your teachers in your schools will. And we'll explore some of that, subject leaders, but we'll also go into some more depth around supporting teachers' professional development and making the best use of that. We are offering support phone calls for subject leaders this term, supporting that return, recovery. I say return, most of you have been in school right through. It's your children that are returning, or some of your children. Maintained schools have been offered that as a free thing, but any school can take up that and could pay to have that. So just contact us if you would like a phone call and you don't know about that and would like to book one. We have a conference coming up. It's not a maths conference. It's an online half-day conference, making the most of catch-up premium. But that sort of looks at the sort of more general thing. So where we've been thinking about here, this is not a COVID-19. It's not a COVID recovery document. However, there's a potential for supporting recovery in some of the things that it has. This conference will look more generally and think about how we might support that and how you might use your catch-up premium to support that. And there's going to be a session within that conference that Andy Timemath and the maths team will lead around diagnostic assessment. And we think that's a real critical bit of work that schools could engage in and would be hugely beneficial in thinking about where your children are and understanding what needs to be done in terms of continuing in their development of understanding mathematics. Building on that, we are then going to offer a 1.5-day training around diagnostic assessment in mathematics. Dates to come. We do free research talks. They're called Babcock Mathematics Research Talks. Some of you I know have already attended BMR1 and BMR2, and they're available online freely. We have BMR3 coming up next week, and we are looking at our research around understanding number lines. So if you remember, I said to you that MPV3 in Key Stage 2 is about place in the linear sort of system. That's going to will fit really nicely with understanding of that, what we've found out through our research. So that might be of interest to you, or you might want to share that with other teachers, and it will be available online afterwards as well. And then we're going to do BMR4, looking at pre-teaching and assigning competence, because again, that pre-teaching has come up within the materials for the non-statutory guidance, particularly sitting in those PowerPoints. So we want to give people a chance to think about and understand what came from our research, because its inclusion was generated by our research, but sometimes things then lose some of the sort of structure and the key things that made them work in the first place. So it's just we will talk through those key things from our research. Again, please book on and join those. If you follow me or the LDP Babcock Maths LDP team on Twitter, we tweet all these things as well, or follow us on Facebook. All that information's there. We have already written a Future Learn course. Some of you will have already participated in that. That's built on the pre-teaching assigning competence. It's a 4-week course, and it's called Supporting Active Participation in Lessons Through Pre-Teaching. That's available on Future Learn. And we have written, and we're just in the final stage of putting together some online, a similar type of online course to the Future Learn one, around understanding number lines, and that will include materials that we developed through the research project, and that will be available later this term. So that's things that we're going to be offering. There's going to be other things that people are going to be offering, things that you're going to be doing in your schools, in your clusters of schools, in your mats, in your different areas. There are things that the hubs will be doing, and you know that we've worked very closely with both Code and Jurassic, and I'm the lead for primary and early years in Jurassic. So we're really trying to tie all those things together. One of the things we wondered whether it would be useful for us as a team to write would be elicitation questions that focused on the prerequisites that teachers could use. We're about to start working on this area. What might I ask the children, and what might I sit and do with them and listen to their responses and probe their responses and just really get a sense of their understanding around? That will help me sort of plan and know whether I need to do some additional work before I can really engage with the year group expectation. And we've put with narrative, those of you that are familiar with children's evidence, it's that sort of thing where we don't just have questions, because there are questions in the document already, there are assessment questions, but it's the thing I was talking about earlier, where we explain the intention of those questions, what you're looking for in the responses from the children, what would indicate to you that the children have got that secure, and what would indicate to you that you still need to do some work, and that is not just about whether they get it right or wrong. So I'm interested in whether you think that is something that would be valuable and of interest, or not. And I'm also interested in whether there's anything else you think, any other support that would be useful to be offered, that potentially we might be in a position to offer. So really, I'm going to invite you all now to head into your chat. You can respond to my question about, is it worth us doing this idea around elicitation questions with that kind of explanation of what you're looking for? Is there anything else you think, any other support that you think would be useful? And just if there's any questions that you would like to ask before we go. And I'm going to put all my attention on chat now.